My name is Audrey Emran Beardsley, an associate professor at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at Arizona State University. Tonight I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Jean V. Glass, Professor Emeritus, Regents Professor Emeritus from Arizona State University. And tonight we are going to interview him for a show titled Inside the Academy. This is the 6th show that we've had so far in honor of guests, in particular guests from the National Academy of Education. You were born in 1940 in Nebraska. Tell us about your childhood.
It was unusual in the company of the other interviewees, I suspect, Midwestern. I was born in the outskirts of Lincoln, Nebraska. It was semi-rural, remote in a way, and with an overwhelming feeling of being remote. I had a strong sense through most of my childhood that I really wasn't anywhere, that everything was someplace else, that there were cities, there were countries, other places, but I wasn't in them and I'd probably never see them. And in many ways that feeling has stayed with me all my lifetime. I'm constantly amazed when I go to some big city that it is I and I'm actually entering this big city. I never expected that to happen. And I think that was a pretty general feeling back then among people in my circumstances.
What were your circumstances?
We were on the edge of being poor. My parents had just worked their way out of poverty. My father had been ill during the Depression, was out of work. He was a printer for the newspaper. My brother, 8 years older, was born in 1932. The family went through very hard times, living off of their parents on my grandparents' farm for a period of years in a garage with a dirt floor. Cooking field greens, dandelions to supplement a meager diet. My father finding little bits of work wherever he could. My sister came along in 1939, and she's about 18 months older than I am. And then I came along 9 months later, which was well, I came 18 months later, but my mother got pregnant 9 months after my sister was born. She wasn't happy about it at all. That caused a rift in the family that basically never healed, I suspect. And I arrived at the start of the Second World War, and it was just a typical lower middle class upbringing in a fairly unpopulated place.
You believe that your dad gave you a cynical view on life. Why?
Well, he had been beaten down by life in a lot of ways, and that was transferred to me. I picked up on it particularly. I think both my sister and I did. He had the bad luck to be born at a rough time where he had to drop out of school at the 8th grade and help support the family, a family of 5 sons and 1 daughter. His father had bad luck trying to dry land farm out in the prairie, going broke in one place after another, and then having the bad luck to live through 2 depressions. There was an early 1920s depression, not as bad as what was called the Great Depression in '29, that pretty well knocked the family down, and then there were health issues, and so my father was honest and hardworking and didn't get many breaks, and so the world looked somewhat mean, foreboding to him. A lot of that got transferred to us.
And he worked nonstop to support his family?
He sure did. During the war, holding down 2 jobs. He got back as a printer during the Second World War. He went with his 4 brothers to enlist in the Second World War after Pearl Harbor, and he was rejected because he had only 1 kidney. He'd been kicked by a horse and had a kidney removed as a child, and so they didn't take him, and that was much to his shame and very hard for him to overcome, especially when all his brothers were serving. And then he got passed over for positions at the newspaper, and that made him more cynical. And but I'm happy he gave me that life view. Really, it served me pretty well, especially in the academic world.
Sure. Your older brother, Ed, talks of times at Shorty's Cafe, where you would eat hamburgers. He loved their hamburgers. Your grandparents' farm, he said he didn't love that so much. And the times you would make fudge and shoot mice with a BB gun. Yeah, I looked up to my brother a lot. He was a role model for me. I was very distant from my father. I had very little interaction with my father, who was busy a great deal of the time. In 1949, my father bought a drugstore that my mother ran for the next 12 or 13 years. And I was raised in that drugstore, helping out and talking to all the customers. The store was next door to Shorty's Cafe, which specialized in hamburgers and chili and other. It was ahead of its time in the fast food department, of course. And my brother, I was closer to my brother and looked up to him more than I did to my father. And fortunately, I had that example to follow, or who knows what might have happened. He also said that you often got in trouble at school for not getting your work done and misbehaving. You say as well that you refused to do homework a lot. You were expelled from classes for back talk, and you graduated 200th in a class of 220. Tell us about your life as a student in school. Well, all of that was true. I had adopted my father's attitude toward authority, I think, and which was a general ethos of Nebraska, a very populous state in its history, and having to knuckle under to the demands of school was something I didn't take to. The work was easy, and most of it was boring, and about the only fun I got out of it was racing other students in finishing arithmetic assignments or lessons, and throw some competition into it to make it intriguing. But I could tell by the 7th grade that there was no future in studiousness for a male student in the 1950s. The Coleman study of adolescence in America that came out, I think, maybe late 50s, early 60s, said the ideal adolescent in America was, let's see, athletic, bright, and non-studious. And I don't know how much that's changed. I suspect it's changed a bit. But you gain social status and position by not studying, by fighting against the system. And I was pretty good in fighting against it. And it got me expelled from a couple classes, and which was also following my brother. He'd been expelled from some classes too. He was also bright and athletic. And so that's framed your philosophy of education today. Well, it has in a lot of ways. All through junior high school and high school, my whole life was built around athletics. Football, basketball, track in spring, and baseball in the summer. And shot put. And the shot put in track and field, and the pole vault before I broke my ankle. And the subjects of school were of no interest to me, and I ignored
all but one class each year. I would pick one class and try to top the class so that nobody was mistaking that I could do it if I felt like it, but that I didn't consider it important. And I don't think it was important that I missed out on most of what junior high and high school had to offer. When I finally went to college in my freshman year, I went to a small college, 1,000 students, a Methodist college in actually almost in my neighborhood, since I knew nothing about colleges anywhere. I had great teachers, and in a semester or two, I made up for everything I didn't learn in high school, which really raised the question of what was the point of trying to learn it in high school if it was that easy to learn later on. I actually had a professor at the University of Nebraska later who Warren Baller was his name, an expert in child development, who would ask the question, why do we struggle so hard to teach things to little kids when they're older? They'll learn it in a minute.
Mm-hmm. And so how would your experiences inform what you would say to educational policymakers, for example, about the current American education system?
Well, I think the big ignored area of education policy these days, and has been for some time, is the area of the curriculum. What is it that's being learned? What is being taught? And is it really important? And all the emphasis is on achievement tests and paper and pencil tests. And are they really getting at anything that's truly valuable to these students? And I really think they're not at all. And the arguments that they are somehow key to careers beyond school or economic competitiveness of the country, I think that's all mistaken, quite mistaken. Yesterday in the New York Times, in an op-ed, David Brooks, the conservative opinion writer, really a first-rate mind in my opinion, though I disagree with him on many things, but he was writing about a topic he called the new humanism, and he said, as parents, we're all focused on our kids' GPA and SAT scores, when in fact we ought to be focused on their development of integrity and character and the ability to form good relationships. And I think, yes, that's what's key. That's what makes healthy and productive adults and human beings. It's not any of this curriculum pushed in the basic skills and the traditional curriculum that's all going to be obsolete in 5-10 years at most. And I think my own development and background and the unimportance of whatever it was schools were trying to teach when I went through schools has certainly shaped my view of this, and I hope my view is right.
Mm. Your friend David Fowler from high school, he remembers the time you brought a package of tennis balls. He too refers to you being quite the athlete in school, also getting in trouble at the same time. You brought a pack of tennis balls to a student council meeting. Do you remember this?
No, I don't remember.
Okay.
That,
and the student council president thanked you publicly in front of everybody for bringing your balls to school. Later in the interview, when I asked him to capture you in his own terms, he said just that you really do bring your balls to school, to education in schools. You believe that almost everything you learn in K-12 is irrelevant to life after school, which we've discussed. You also define yourself as an evangelist, turned atheist, turned Jewish, given the marriage to your wife, Sandy. Tell us about Sandy.
Well, Sandy is my other role model and the light of my life, to be sure. I had 2 previous marriages. I am a Freudian through and through. I believe that people repeat their neurotic conflicts over and over throughout their lifetime, and it almost never changes, doesn't matter whether they've been psychoanalyzed or not. They'll continue with those same basic conflicts. And I entered into this third important relationship in my life with low expectations for myself, what I was capable of and whether I was actually capable of finding happiness. And she has certainly shaken my Freudian foundation a bit, because now I know it does take two people, and it's not all my fault that I was never particularly good at relationships. And at an advanced stage, I found something wonderful.
She says the two of you are joined at the hip and the heart. You love spending every day with one another. You have an addiction to donuts. This was also mentioned by the others who know you so well, with notes regarding how you hid your addiction from Sandy that they personally knew about. She says your most significant accomplishment is your family, and I think you agree. According to them, you have raised them to stand up for what they think is right, to be confident, skeptical, liberal thinkers, hard workers, and to consistently look out for those with fewer opportunities in life. Tell us about your children and your grandchildren.
Well, we have a family that we have put together in the last 20 years. And it includes 4 children and now 9 grandchildren, ranging from 1 year to 15 years. I'm not nearly as good a grandfather or father as I ought to be. I am by nature pretty impatient, and I generally don't find real youngsters at the toddler stage or shortly after that interesting or fun to be around. When they can pick up a tennis racket, they become a little more interesting. But I do worry that I convey to some of the older children the same cynicism that my father gave to me, and that isn't always, unless you're strong enough to fight the system and stand up against it and succeed in some small ways, it may not be the best gift to give to children.
Okay. Sandy also brought that up too, that you babysat your grandson one time watching women's wrestling.
It was boxing, women's boxing. Actually, it's worse than women's wrestling.
But it was a great babysitting tool.
We enjoyed it.
And you also let your grandchildren give you haircuts? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't paid for a haircut for almost 20 years now. And actually, one of them was afraid of the clippers at the barbershop. And excuse me. So we had the idea of letting him give me my haircut, and that worked out well. I think he handles his own haircuts. At least we saw him on Skype the other night, and he was pretty well shaved himself.
Helped reduce his fear, his grandpa. Well, Sandy notes how funny you are, especially with your family. Your daughter Julie says, "Funny things don't often happen to you, yet you are full of funny stories about other people." One funny memory she has of you is when she was 7 years old and you took her snow skiing. You made up a story about how a school bus full of nuns and children drove off the side of the cliff. Do you remember that?
Oh, yes, yes. Well, I was very misunderstood in that. I was practicing a form of therapy that Viktor Frankl had invented. It was called some paradoxical intention or something. She was afraid of this winding road to the ski area. It had no barriers on the outside. And it was pretty dicey driving, and she was getting very, very nervous, and Frankl's idea was that if you push this to the extreme, then a person will find out that their fear is irrational, unrealized, and they'll get through it. They'll no longer be afraid. The anxiety will be gone. So I told her that, I thought, well, what would be the worst thing you could imagine happening on this road? Well, it would be maybe some Catholic school bus that goes over the side and everyone's killed, and it didn't work for her.
And she threw up.
Yes, she did, yeah.
Okay, your stepson Kyle says you are his mother's best therapist, comic relief at family dinner parties, even if a lot don't get your jokes. And you're also a Duncan yo-yo champion.
Yes, that's right.
What's that?
1952. In the late 50s, there were these Filipinos who came through the U.S., and One of my tennis buddies was saying the other day that he knew the family, the original Duncan family that created the wooden yo-yo, and he had won one of these championships himself in Boston. And they would hold a competition at these drugstores all across the country that sold the Duncan yo-yo. And you had to go through, you started with a group of 20 or 30 kids. I was 12 at the time, and you had to go through a rigorous set of exercises: walk the dog, spank the baby, rock the cradle, round the world. And then whoever survived, it came down to how many loop-the-loops you could do without stopping. And I think I had 29 loop-the-loops and walked off with actually the vest, the knitted vest with the emblem on it. And that emblem is somewhere in a drawer.
That was your first experience in measurement and testing?
Well, yeah, it was.
Tell us about your higher education.
Well, graduating at the bottom of the high school class, there weren't a lot of options. My friend Dave Fowler, whom you talked about, mentioned worked hard all through high school, was very studious. He's a very bright fellow. His father was a professor at the university. In fact, Dave's family was the ideal family, a family I wished I had had. Wonderful parents and sons who got along. But I was dumped out of high school with no prospects for higher education. But I read in a catalog for the local college, Nebraska Wesleyan University, 1,000 students, staffed with wonderful professors, that you could gain a scholarship if you came in and took a test. And I went in, and I realized many, many years later that they gave me the PSAT, which is like some precursor to the SAT exam. And I was pretty good at tests, and they wrote me and said, we'll give you a scholarship. So they paid my way, and I went 2 years. I was married at the time, married right out of high school. That was de rigueur in Nebraska in those days. And I went to Wesleyan for 2 years, then transferred to the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, just 5 miles away, and finished in 3 semesters, and then off to graduate school at Wisconsin.
And your degree was in mathematics, is that right?
German and mathematics undergraduate, and German because there was no German in my background, but my first father-in-law was born on an island in the Missouri River and of German parents, and spoke German until he was about 5 years old, and it was a way to connect with him. And so we started conversing in German, and before I knew it, I started taking courses and built a major in it. I also had a major in math. And I was headed to be a German teacher in the state of Nebraska when I, by accident, ran into a girl I'd grown up with since elementary school who was a typist in the ed psych department. And at the time I was doing janitorial work to pay tuition, supplement the income of my wife and me. And she said there was a job for a computer programmer in her department, that a new faculty member from Princeton had a grant to do a Monte Carlo study of the roots of some matrix. And they needed a computer programmer. And so I went over and presented myself to this person who turned out to be Bob State of qualitative research and evaluation fame now. And I told him I was a computer programmer, which I wasn't. And he said, he took a chance on me. And that started an association that completely changed my life.
And how long did you work with Bob State?
Well, that was 1.5 years, all the time I was at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. And then in 1961, he was headed to the Invitational Testing Conference in New York City that always occurred at the end of October. And he was taking his mother to see the United Nations. She had seen it many times. His mother lived in a little town outside of Lincoln called Adams, Nebraska. And she was the ambassador to the UN from Adams, this town of about 150 people. And he wanted help with the driving, so we both drove with his mother to New York City. It was the first time I'd ever left the state of Nebraska, first time I'd ever seen anything, really, except grasslands. We went through Madison, Wisconsin. He was introducing me to graduate schools. He gave me the message that I should not stay in Nebraska, and which was a terrifying message to me, and because I had no experience of the world. We stopped in Madison and met Julian Stanley, whom he had corresponded with before this trip. Julian had sent a letter to all his colleagues around the country to give the Miller Analogies test and the Doppelt mathematical reasoning test to all your students and send him the best scores. This is Julian, who years later started the search for these 12-year-olds who had 800 SAT scores to accelerate them through college and doctorate degrees and whatnot. Well, he was doing this with us at the time. This was in the early 1960s. And so that was a connection between Bob and Julian, and I was introduced to Julian, totally intimidated by the University of Wisconsin. Went on to New York City, which was quite an experience to a 20-year-old who'd never been out of the state. When we got back to Lincoln, I had a telegram from Julian offering me a NDEA fellowship to go to graduate school. Well, I had not only never received a telegram, I had never met anyone who had received a telegram, so I was completely swept off my feet and took a huge chance and decided to go to graduate school at Wisconsin. And the rest is history, as they say.
Bob Stake said that he knew that you were going to outgrow the Nebraska measurement people. And so he encouraged you to go to Princeton and Syracuse and Madison, and he chose Madison to his regret because he was a graduate of Princeton. You graduated with your PhD then in educational psychology from Wisconsin with a minor in statistics in 1965, and you were 25.
I was 24 technically. 24. I would have been, or I became 25 about a month and a half later.
And then what?
This was very important to Julian because his whole idea was that anyone with any brains is bored by school. This was Julian's philosophy, it's not mine. And the only humane thing to do to them is accelerate them through as fast as they possibly can so they can go on to whatever happens next. Well, this was an outgrowth of Julian's experience as a child and during the Second World War. He graduated high school, I think, when he was 15 or so, and he immediately started college at a very small college, Georgia Southern or something like that, near Atlanta. And he was well on his way to having a BA probably when he was 20, and the war came about. And he ended up sitting in a munitions dump in North Africa for 4 years. And he felt like his best years were wasted. And so he basically spent the rest of his life making certain that no one else suffered a similar fate. Sometimes it worked out to be very pushy mentoring of young people. I suspect my mentoring under him had been somewhat pushy, though I relished it. And so for a while, I think I held his record of finishing up before I was 25. Someone else probably broke it since then, I don't know. I know one of his stars was a young woman who he had on track to finish hers by age 23, and she thwarted his wishes by falling in love with one of the other students and marrying and dropping out and finishing when she's like 26. And she's had a great career at Vancouver since then, and both of them did. And
but you're not competitive or anything about records, right?
oh, I'm very, very competitive.
I know, it's coming.
That's right.
We're coming to tennis here
Quite
pretty soon.